Hi, guys, and welcome back to another edition of Behind the Visual, the podcast where I interview all those people responsible for creating and putting together those videos and images you see out in your world every single day. I, of course, am your host, advertising and lifestyle photographer Mark Hansen. And today, my guest is Tony Reagan. Tony is a former model agent, photographer's agent, and most recently, a movie producer. So we get into that a little bit with Tony about what he's done, which he has done everything. He has seen everything. So we get a couple of really cool stories. We get to hear what it's like to be on set with Mary J. Blige and do a shoot with her. Also, what it's like to shoot or not shoot Lindsay Lohan. So we'll find out about that one. Also, a shoot he did that had 5 SUVs full of Secret Service agents and a 45-day shoot he did and what it's like to put together a 45-day shoot, plus a whole lot more. I think you guys will really enjoy this one. Lots of cool stories. And I look forward to hearing what all you guys think about this. So be sure to like it, thumbs up it, comment on it, subscribe to it, all that kind of stuff, and let me know what you think. And here we go. Okay, so you grew up where?
I grew up in Massachusetts for my cavity prone years.
Cavity prone years.
Yeah, that was from first grade to my first semester of college at Holyoke Community at Western Mass, and then my family moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in '73.
Did you finish college?
I didn't finish college there, no. From there, I went to the University of North Florida, Florida Junior College, and then I even tried a semester at USC, and then it wasn't for me. And that's when I went back. And then I was married and had 2 kids, and then New York somehow kept. Oh, I did a TV commercial. That's how that all started.
Yes, I didn't model from there.
Yeah, that was a little bit there. That was back in the '70s. And then I saw New York, and then I was up there, and there was an agency called Legends that the agent came to the shoot, to the actual taping of the commercial, 1-hour photo. And she said, "Oh, you need an agent." And I said, "Oh, really?" And then
This is in New York?
This is in New York.
And so what got you to New York? So you did the commercial in Myrtle Beach?
Yeah, the commercial in Myrtle Beach at Dino De Laurentiis' studio there in Wilmington.
Okay.
Are they still around? Yeah. The studio that was well, that was before your time, but they did like Firestarter there with Drew Barrymore back in the 70s.
I don't know what studios are still up in Wilmington.
They kind of have some there,
But yeah, there's still some up there.
but that was the big start. And then it was a fizzle out. But when I got to New York, I was a bartender at O'Neill's.
So why'd you go to New York then? You just do that and you're just like, hey.
Well, that was after my divorce, and then I realized there's nothing in it was either that. I knew I could be a bartender and I could survive in New York, wait table, because that was the thing to do back then. That was the golden handcuff disease, because everybody made so much money instantly back then. Everybody with expense accounts, companies and all that. It was a wonderful way to be social and get out there, and that's how I met people. And I met Sonia Mulholland through this kind of social acting. She was a model. She was face of the '80s, back when Elite had that worldwide campaign of searching out the face of the year, face of 1980, whatever, face of '81. And so she was a South African model that came to New York, and I had a friend that I knew in New York that also grew up with her in South Africa. Anyway, that's how I got to meet her. And then met Max Wielander, who was dating her at that time. He was on the tennis circuit. And that was later that he became #1, I think '87. But I started working as a bartender there, and she came to see me one night and sat at the bar. And I kept saying, there's got to be something else I could be doing here. And she said, now keep in mind, I was in New York and LA for a year or so. That's another chapter, but I was a limousine driver out there.
You're a limousine driver in LA?
Uh-huh.
Okay, that I did not know.
Yeah, and I lived with Beverly Coburn at Tower Drive at her mansion up there behind the Beverly Hills Hotel. Kind of a thing out of American Gigolo kind of thing.
What's the best story from driving a limo? There's got to be something.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot.
Well, give me one or two then.
Okay, there was this one company owner. He lived in Pacific Palisades. Oh, sorry, I'm reading this. Right, and he would come into town every Friday, which wasn't far, and he'd want to go out all over Hollywood, West Hollywood, Hollywood. He had another agenda, I'm sure, but I would drive him, and he would always put $1,500 up front. That was for the 2 days. It was Friday to Saturday.
Okay. Damn.
And yeah, and then it was just driving him around to clubs and so forth. But he liked me, and I looked like an actor type back then, you know. And so that was one of the biggest. And I never knew where he wanted to do, where he go, but I would just drop him off, and he'd always say, "Well, the next time, you know, you'll have to join me." And I'll say, "Well, you know, we got to keep business."
Right. Okay.
But that was LA. That was in '86. But then I was still had a foot in the door in New York, because I subleased my apartment that I had on 29th Street, and that was a 4-story walk-up. But I thought I got a great deal, because it was $750 a month back then for a 2-bedroom.
Oh wow!
And so I subleased it. I think it was for like $1,000, and I did it for a year. And I went to LA. Ended up meeting up with James Coburn's son, Jimmy Coburn, who was married to a South African art director. And we became friends, and he said, "My mom needs some help while you're in LA. Maybe you can visit with her, and you know, you need a place to stay at the apartment over the garage, kind of like Sunset Boulevard, more like that."
All right.
And that's what I did. And then it became friendly with Beverly, his mother, and played in that mansion a lot.
Yeah.
that was a story, but maybe that needs to stay private too at that time. So, there's a lot of play.
Just a lot of private stories.
Well, when you do, you have nothing else to lose kind of thing. I was like living like that, living on the edge. And then there was a lot of trips to Vegas. Played there a lot in the beginning, because she'd like to go to Vegas. And then when I got back to New York, that's when Sonia and I met up again. And I was tending bar still at the same restaurant. I got my job back. And that's when I said, I got to do something else. I really need to do something else. And that's what she said. Have you ever thought about being a model's agent? And I said, do they make any money? Not like this. I mean, because that back then, that was probably like $1,500 a week cash for me.
Oh, nice.
Plus,
Yeah.
you know, it was 35 years ago.
Yeah. Damn.
And I said, if I could make this kind of money. So she said, you know what? I'm going to ask Louise DuPont, who is the owner of the agency, if she'd be interested in meeting you. And I said, okay, because she said you were a good salesperson, you know, and that's pretty much what the agency did, what you did as an agent. Long story short, I met her. She was wheeling a baby carriage with no baby in it. She was a little bit left of center when I met her.
No dog in it?
No dog,
Just nothing.
Just wheeling a baby. Oh, she had her groceries in it.
Okay.
And I never asked her why she was wheeling that baby carriage with the groceries in it, because it looked like there was a baby underneath those blankets, but it was groceries.
So she put it away. So she got the carriage.
Yep.
With groceries, and there's a blanket over the groceries.
Over the
like
grocery. Yeah.
Okay.
And I met her on Spring Street, and it was Spring and Varick. No, that was Varick was the other downtown street. It was Spring and the Cross Street. I can't remember the name. King Street. And she was over shopping, and I went to the agency, and one of the receptionists said she's out shopping and she's over in this neighborhood. Anyway, I walked downstairs and I was walking out, and she was coming up with the baby carriage, and that's when I said, oh. And then the rest of it, it's convoluted, because it's like, well, I don't even, do I ask about the baby carriage? She started talking to me about, you know, it's good to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Let's go upstairs and talk. So that's what we did. And I remember telling her that in order for me to go ahead and make a transition to anything, I needed to make about this much money. Well, that much money worked out to be $62,500 a year on a salary. And I said, I will need that.
This was 80.
This was in 86.
Yeah.
86, 87.
Yeah.
87. Wow. Anyway, next thing I knew, I had the job. And it was for 90 days to see how it worked out, but she was going to pay me that money. And so it worked. And a paycheck, it was $1,200 and change a week. I remember. I was like, ooh, but it's actual paycheck.
Right.
And I was doing a 9 to 6 job at an agency, and I didn't know the first thing about it. I had no clue.
So say how'd that work out?
There was a lot of nights staying there, asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And listening a lot, because back then all the agents sat at a big round table, and the wheel was in the middle with all the charts of the models.
Oh yeah, I remember going to the agencies and seeing all that.
You see that big booking wheel.
Yeah.
You know, and I just watched a lot and listened, and the phones wouldn't stop ringing. It was another time, another period of phones that there were not enough phones, not enough lines. It just rang and rang and rang all day long. And I listened and I caught it, and then it wasn't hard to catch on to what you're doing. Yeah.
Right.
Then I had to find out the format of how it functioned. And then I went to a night class at FIT.
So I had the negotiation part when you did that. Was that you? Were you doing that all on your own, negotiating the rates with these people, or did you have to go and ask somebody like, "Hey, they want to do it for this. What should I tell them?"
The rates for the models?
Yeah.
Well, there was sort of a format that you looked at. Like when I was, let's say they gave me 4 or 5 girls, say work on these girls. You have to make go-sees was the first thing. I didn't know what a go-see was. I said, go-see what?
That's like when I first did a test shoot. Like, these models are paying. Like I was shooting, it was a test shoot for the agency, and the agency paid me whatever. These girls are going to do test shoots. They're paying whatever it was for a test shoot. And I was like, it's a test shoot. Why are they paying you anything?
No, they didn't pay there.
And then I realized, oh yeah, well this was
that's a different
not a real agency.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
it turned out not the agency that lasted maybe 6 months to a year. So
there was a lot of that back then, though, because it was a huge industry.
Oh yeah,
a tremendous industry, and there was a lot of capitalizing on vanity and ego and emotion and dreams. Biggest thing was dreams.
Well, do you remember that story you told me about the little girl at the convention, the modeling convention, who stood up and said she wanted to be a runway model?
Yeah, they took the microphone away from me.
Tell me that story.
Well, what happened there? I was invited. It was in Jacksonville, Florida. I won't forget that. And they invited agents, this company, like Model Search America. They all had names of the
AMTC, IMTA, Model Search.
They traveled the US and they put together conventions, and you brought your kids and paid the fee. And it was a weekend.
Thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And it depended on how many programs that you want your kid to be enrolled in. But at the end of the day, they got it.
Yeah.
Because they did prey on that from the family. Your daughter could be a huge success, and blah blah blah.
But here's who's done it before, and they came through here, and now look what they did.
How they did it. And so I remember this girl got up, and she must have been 5'2", but back then it was 5'9". It was statuesque, and they were much bigger women.
Yeah,
runway
taller.
Oh yeah. And
it was bigger.
It was like a prerequisite that they had.
Tammy's boyfriend told her she was a big girl one time, and she lost her shit on him.
And
what he meant was, "You're tall." She was like, "I'm not big. I'm tall."
But Tammy was, but that was the average height, was 5'9". You couldn't be much lower. I think at that time, Kate Moss was coming into the scene, and everyone like, oh,
she was short. What, 5'7"?
Short. Yeah,
7.5, something like that.
Something, yeah, but she was too small.
Yeah.
And who knew what she was going to be, right? Back today. But I started off with that, making go-sees for the models to go see photographers.
Tell me about the story. She stood up. She's 5'2".
Oh, so this girl.
Yeah.
She stood up, and then she asked me. And I remember her saying, "What are my chances of being a successful fashion model?" I said, "I don't see a chance in the world that you're going to be a successful fashion model." And I didn't mean it, but I just felt bad because I think that was
true.
It was like her parents were sitting there and all that, and they were getting soaked into like this course is going to cost you additional $400. Right. This tomorrow presentation is going to cost you another $500 for the runway. It was all these little classes and stuff. But all I thought was a way for them to extort money from these families, these people. And I thought, like, I didn't see anybody there. Anyway, that happened, and somebody took the mic from my hand. I was on the stage, and I remember I was asked to sit down. And I didn't get invited back anymore. I mean, but then I didn't want to either because I didn't want to be a part of that. But it ran a long time. It was a very profitable business. And sort of when I went back to New York after that event, I just delved further into, I wanted to be the director of this agency. I knew I could. And I studied a lot. I looked at old bookings. I looked at contracts. I read conditions. I read usages. I saw how the application for visuals were applied to media, or applied to usage, or applied to the time frames. And I looked and kept reading about so many contracts. This agency did a very good business. And they had a lot of what they call the cream of the crop at that point. It was only about 35 girls, but they had 35 of the biggest. At one point, this is when magazines were still huge in the world, and you could walk by a magazine stand in New York City, or a kiosk, or bodega where they had all the magazines. At one point, I think there was something like 21 magazine covers out in 1 month. That all of them were named girls at that point, the agency I worked for.
Wow.
And that was for the size of the agency compared to the amount of periodicals or issues, magazines. That was quite an accomplishment. And along with that, with the editorials came the endorsements. That's where the companies like fragrance and cosmetics and hair and fashion, they all followed who was on the covers and who was in the editorials. And that's who got these jobs. And that's why the editorial paid nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Here's your business card.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere where if you shot for Vogue, I think the photographer's fee, creative fee for the photographer is like $250, but they paid for everything else that you did. So I mean, you could have a $500,000 shoot, you get $250 of it, but they paid for everything else, and then your career.
It was called Condé Nast, the Condé Nast rate, and the agencies only made they'd only pay 10%.
Really?
At that time, it was a 20% service fee added to every client, right? But they only paid 10%, and either you took it or you didn't. Like, oh, you got to give us this.
Yeah.
But everyone knew, it was understood that you had to have that in order to make a step in the right direction. And then I that was, not to keep going over it, but that was day in and day out. I focused on that. And in 1991, two of the directors left and opened their own agency. And it was one of those Friday nights to Monday morning. Nobody knew about it. It's like out the back door. Took a few of the girls with you, that sort of thing. Even though they were under contract, that was something that wasn't fought about a lot in courts back then, which later on became a big issue. But when that happened, I said, either I'm going to have to prove myself, or the owner's going to hire somebody else. And so I asked for that chance, and she gave it to me, along with a sizable raise. But then I was really buckled down. I was going to whatever seminars for art buying, or however I needed to approach being a part at a bigger scale of a director. And that's when I started befriending photographers. I started to see the connection. If a photographer liked a certain girl and followed her, or endorsed her, or supported by photographing her, he took her up the ladder with him, or to his clients. And then it all became a network of how you're going to socialize this to make it work. It was the network of it. And that's what I kept thinking, I don't like what those guys do over there. That was the production of the repping that, but that came much later. I didn't leave the modeling business until 97.
So is that when you were doing your brunches in San Francisco? And
that was the part of the fun of it all. Yeah, because there was a lot of money involved as far as expense accounts and so forth, and they seemed to not stop. And if you could, say to a fellow agent or somebody that was out in San Francisco, let's say I was in New York, and I remember going out there for brunch, just flying out there on the red eye, or on the nightbound flight out to San Francisco after work on Friday, having brunch on Saturday, playing all day in San Francisco, and then just flying back. And that was all an expense. All expense. And it was basically going to a party. But you still made a connection, but at the same time, it was immeasurable by what was allowed. And what you could do. And I don't see that ever happening.
You can't get by with anything close to that anymore.
I don't think that's going to happen anymore. No. It's sort of like Vegas got found out, right? Now all the corporations moved in there. It's now a big sweatshop, another Disneyland kind of thing. They could never be what it was. And the same was for the fashion industry and the modeling business, and all that broke off from it. And then I became a hair and makeup photographer's agent, and that's when I met you later on after that, when I was at another agency.
So how'd you go from being the model agent to working? It was looks, right?
It was looks.
How'd you go from being the
model
agent
agent
to working?
Oh, because I had enough of the modeling agency business. I mean, after a while, it was a high pressure job. I mean, you are dealing with people. You're dealing with young girls or their families. It became too much, because it's one thing to go after it and secure work for them. And it's another thing when they sit there and tell you, I don't feel like going to work today. And I know it's $12,000 or $15,000 I'm making for this campaign for this one day shoot, but I'm going to cancel. And you go, but you'd be the responsible agent that you had to either fix this or get them to arrive or support with some other equal. We need a girl. We need a model, and that happened a few times, too many for me. And I just said, I need the photographers. What drew my attention to them is that they were adults. They were professionals, and that did happen in that very rare cases, but. It wasn't the same as the models, and I didn't have to deal with the parents. And these young girls were pretty much exploited. It wasn't like it all seemed to be.
Well, a friend of mine, Brooke Hall, she's modeled forever, since she was like in her early teens. She's 40 now, 41 something. I had her on. I was talking to her. She told me about a shoot where the casting, her and like 3 of her friends with this casting. And they started asking these really weird questions, like, so what do you like to go to parties? What do you look like in a bikini? Or just other little things, she said, just felt a little off and a little weird. So she said, when they came to me, they said, do you like the party? She said, oh, I love going to parties at my church. They're so much fun. And she said, because she knew that was going to get her cut. So they cut her. 2 of her friends ended up getting the gig. And she's like, I don't know about this, guys. And they're like, it'll be fine. It was supposed to be a shoot over in Europe someplace. The girls got on the plane. They all flew over there. They made a stop in Paris first, I think is what she said, because they were supposed to be going someplace else. Well, they ended up not going anyplace else. It was for some like Arabian.
Oh, they had the Arabian prince. That was big.
And they took their phones from them. And the girls and told them, like, you're just going to basically do whatever he says for the next however many days. And these girls freaked out and found the phone like from one of the maids and called this girl's boyfriend who happened to be an NBA player, and he found a flight and got him out of there. But
so many of those stories existed. I wasn't part of the part that I ended up more so about. I was more in the directorship, so there were junior or younger agents underneath me that did developing, but it was so time consuming. Mm-hmm. To negotiate and to fine tune and to revise and all of that. So that's what I ended up doing, and that's where the photographers, and that's when I started seeing more of this side, and that's when I went on to go represent photography.
Is there a big difference between representing photographers and representing the models?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Was there a learning curve, or is it just
you kind of took the same? You kind of took the same network of terms, usages of that. Right. The fees were different, of course, and of course, when you did the assignment, for instance, when I booked models, I would book models for a portion of what the assignment was, because you didn't do the entire. There was other models from other agencies, and I represented only women, and so the men's portion was done by the men's agency. So it was, you did part of it, but when you represented the photographer, you did the entire assignment. Yeah, from scouting to locations in the very beginning, to the pre-production of casting and assigning who the hair and makeup would be that would best qualify for what the looks they were trying to do, the stylists that were involved, right on down, set design. And that was intriguing. That was like, oh, you're putting the magic together with all these pieces. And I really enjoyed that, because it was kinetic. It just kept busy. One thing led to another. And you met so many people involved in art, involved in that industry at that point. And that was the thing that kept me going, kept me interested. And then representing photographers, they had to conceptualize what people were trying to say. Oh, we want to get this out of it. We want it to look like this. Right. Or they'd show swipes or samples of how they wanted their campaign to be directed or accomplished. And that was when you said, oh, well, okay, this is going to require this and that. So that was all part of that. That was part of that conclusion to arrive at that. That was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And then I met this young photographer.
I remember that day, man. Because I remember, okay, this was so long ago, I was sending faxes. And maybe an email. And I was like, I'm going to be in New York, I want to meet. And your assistant was Artie?
Yardy.
Yardy. Yeah. So Yardy was like, we're not taking anybody, but Tony he'll meet with you. I was like, all right, hell yeah. So we met, you sat there, looked through my book. Do you remember that?
I do, and I remember seeing a cover in there, and I said, why is this in here?
You didn't say, why is this
I said, you gotta go.
I said, what the fuck is this doing in your book?
What is this in your book?
I think I remember it like I was sitting there in front of you right this second, like, what the fuck is this doing in your book? And I went,
it's awful.
And you just went, this is because it's a cover? I went, uh-huh.
Well, that was, there were some bad covers.
But that's when I liked you. That's the minute I knew I liked you, was because of that, because nobody else had said a word. You know, you're like, the model's terrible. And they're sitting in the greatest dress, and the font on this thing is, I mean, it was.
Well, I think the model at that time was a well-known at that time.
My model? No,
it wasn't.
She was some local kind of.
Oh, it was a local. Okay.
Yeah, she was like, because I remember saying the photography is not bad, but everything else. I was like, oh, and he's like, come here, let me show you some stuff. And he showed me these Hilfiger things that you guys had shot for Hilfiger. And he told me these guys were getting like 15 grand a day or something. And said, now they don't want to shoot for 2,500 a day. I was like, I'll do it. I'll shoot all day long for 2,500 a day.
Oh gosh, I remember that. That's when they tried to cross that bridge, to get control of the fees and so on, because it was getting escalated. And don't forget these fees. I often wonder where these fees come from. We just kind of reached up and said, what's the day rate here? 15 times. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And kind of, but you always wonder where the cap was. You know,
I was having drinks with an art producer in New York. I guess, because of COVID, it's probably been 2 years ago, maybe more, 2.5 years ago. And at one point, she's like, "So," and she works for one of the biggest agencies in the world. And she's like, "So, what do you think? Like, one job for me, you can pay off your house?" I'm like, what? I said, "I doubt it." And she goes, "Well, I did pay," and this was a one-time thing, but she said, "One time I did pay a photographer $500,000. I went, okay.
Yeah, that did happen. It happened. And I saw that a few times in production.
I was like, how do you get that? What the hell are you shooting that you got a $500,000 fee? I want it.
Oh.
But I mean, I'm assuming it was obviously multiple days.
Well, more than likely was. I don't know if I should use the gap as something, but back then, I don't know if these names could be edited out, but I remember working in production with that, and I was representing the hair and makeup and the stylist. The photographer was part of my circle of friends. And so anyway, he had come to me and said, I'm going to book the hair, makeup, and styling through your agency. And I said, okay, that'd be great. And then we did represent some really fine talent. So it wasn't as if they were doing you a favor in that sense, but it was, a favor in the sense you could have gone other places and got equally suitable talent. But I remember talking with them in San Francisco. This is where they were based. The art buyer, I remember throwing out a fee of $4,000 a day for the stylist. And she said, okay. It wasn't as if she went, oh, that's high, or can you do anything about that? It is multiple days, because it was 5 days, I think, of prep, 10 days of shooting, and 5 days of return, which is what stylists did. They had to return the merchandise or wrap up their shoot. Usually that's what it was called. And I remember looking at that going like, well, that's 20, it's like $30,000-$40,000 just in one booking for a fashion stylist. And then I did the hair and makeup for the same rate.
Okay, when you threw out the number and she said, okay, anytime I do something like that, I think I'm throwing out a high number and the client immediately agrees to it, I'm like,
it could have been higher.
I should have gone higher.
Yeah, but I thought it was a lot to begin with.
Yeah.
From what I was looking at 25 from like previous bookings. And then I look at these rates and I just go, well, why not? Because I'd heard from other agents that I was able to get this fee. And I go, well, let me try that. And that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah.
Then somewhere in the early 2000s, it kind of got a wrap, like, oh, we only going to pay, this is our fee for the hair, this is our fee. It started getting recognition from the from the clients that they had to get a hold on this. Yeah. And so that's what happened. That was later on. And I did this representing fashion stylists, hair, makeup artists, and set designers until the World Trade Center got bombed in 2001. And that's when I, after all that settled, tried to get back into Manhattan because we worked downtown on Chambers Street, which is just a few blocks away from the World Trade Center. I came back to work trying to figure out heads or tails. And I knew then, I said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do it it's time. And I was in my mid 40s. Yeah. And so I said, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. So I got together with a few people and sat down and talked who I could represent and who was needing a representation for what I did. And I had a name by then. People knew me. Right. And it was respected. And so in 2003, I opened up with a photographer named Rod Spicer.
How'd you guys meet?
I met him through an agency, and
was he rep at the time?
He had representation at the time, and the owner of that agency hired me to work for him while I was building my own company. It was a strange kind of connection because he knew I wasn't staying. Right. But at the same time, he liked my work enough to say, we need your help. And I did work for him. It was a fair deal. You know, I got clients and so forth that he wasn't able to get. And it was on one of these bookings that I got for his Rod Spicer. He went into the name Spicer. And I got him Nordstrom's. That was a department store. You probably know that. And they couldn't get Nordstrom's.
How did you get Nordstrom when they couldn't get? What did you do?
What
did you do to get these clients? Is what I.
Well, how I helped Nordstrom's. There was a young art director at the time, and she was trying to break her way into advertising. And all I could do to help her, and I helped a lot of people. That was what you did. Yeah. It was a network. And I knew that Nordstrom's, even though they were based in Seattle, was looking for somebody to headquarter in New York because that's where all the major shoots were taking place. Right. And they needed an art director there to head up. And I said, well, why don't you try this? And I'll call them. And because I was working with them, because I had the talent at the time that they liked. And don't forget, there were some that came from the modeling industry. You know, I carried that with me because the bigger girls that I represented, that Nordstrom, let's say, as a client liked as well as many other clients, I had connections there. Right. So I called the creative director personally and said, know somebody that you might be interested in looking at to hire for New York, you know. Anyway, so that was the long story, how I got to help this woman out, and she became an art director. I think to this day, she may have ended up staying with them for like 20 years and ended up moving out to Seattle. And they moved her out there. I mean, she became a serious art director with them. But when I found out that they were doing another shoot in New York, this was coming through another production house, I just simply called her directly and said, can I be a part of this with a photographer? And she said, well, who do you have in mind? And I told her. She said, I've noticed his work and all that, but it wasn't part of our lineup that we are like. They always had the usuals, right? Yeah. There was a lineup. I said, well, how about if we give him an opportunity and let's see what we can do? And so she said, I'm going to get back to you on that. And I said, all right, I'll look forward to it. And I knew she'd get back to me either with good news or maybe not this time. So anyway, she called me back. She said, I've got 10 days. I want to try it. And she looked at his work. He was a reputable photographer, very good, very talented, but he just deserved a chance.
That's a hell of a trial, 10 days.
Yeah, it was. And that's when it led to the other parts of it, of hair and makeup that could go well with him. And that's what I discussed with the photographer who we'd like. And then also I got in on the production. So that we're going to pay you as an assistant producer to help us with your team there. You have photography, hair, makeup, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, so we put that package together for it. And I saw how that worked and how it wasn't hard to do, but it was just knowing people and connected to the right people or the right channels to make it work. And that's when I thought, I can do this. And so there was a problem at this agency. That's why I don't say the name of it, where they had sort of mismanaged funds. And the photographer, Spicer, came to me and was demanding payment for certain jobs he did for them, thinking that I could help, knowing that I worked there.
Was this the agency? You worked at some agency that was right next door to...
It was right on Houston and Broadway.
And there was somebody had their archives right beside you.
That was he's a well-known
it was
photographer named Sante Durazio.
That's who it was. Yeah. Was that?
And they also, his agent or his studio manager asked me to represent him at one time too. I mean, I was very connected to a lot of people, and that's how you became a good agent.
Represent Santo.
I looked at his work and I kept thinking, what could I do that somebody else hasn't done?
Right.
It was well known.
Yeah.
Very well known, and I didn't know it. That's how I answered him. What could I do for you that already hasn't been?
Right.
Because I wasn't that kind of agent per se, but I knew that what I could do, I could help or be more beneficial to these upper coming people who haven't stepped into that big arena yet or something. So that's how I answered him, and he always kind of said, "Well, if ever you're interested, come see me." And then it all happened rather quickly. That the photographer came and demanded his money from this agency. And I remember it was a Friday, and he looked at me walking out the door because he didn't get paid. And he said, "I'm going to this other agent. Either you're coming with me or you're not." And by that time, we had developed a relationship in bookings and so forth, and did a lot of work together while we were at this agency, and it moved quickly. And it was in August that this ultimatum was paid to me on a Friday, August 8th. I'll never forget it. And that weekend I spent with him at his studio, looking at work, how we could do this. And August 11th, he said, "Why don't you go downtown and get a business license and let's open this up." And so Spicer Photo was born, and Tony Reagan. And so from there, it just went fast. I had no job with a paycheck.
Right.
I just said, I'm going to extend by representing a photographer who I said, okay, now all that pressure is on me. And he was a working photographer, but I had no options for him to go out and do anything with it the next step.
Yeah.
Because the agencies don't divulge that back to you unless they exercise that right and they take their percentage. And okay, so we wanted to make it all clean. We're not honoring any of these options. You could go find them or get some.
Right.
And I went to I went to a client on 34th Street. It was called AGA, Allied Graphic Arts.
I remember.
And I talked to a client there who now became a bigger agent in New York. She broke away years to come, but she was the client, and she had a Lord & Taylor. It was a department store on Fifth Avenue. And I told her what was happening or what had happened as of Friday to Monday, and I met with her that week. And she wasn't aware of what happened, and she thought I was coming up there representing, Spicer for this other. I said, no, this is what's happened. And it happened like that. It changed quickly sometimes. And I remember her looking at me across the table saying, I've got 10 days of Lord & Taylor starting in 2 weeks. She said, let me get back to you on this. She said, and she did. She got back to me later on that afternoon after I'd given her my new phone number and so forth. And she said, let's book them 10 days. That was at $4,000 a day. And that was enough to get us over the little hump.
Yeah.
Because back then they gave you a 50% deposit on upcoming work. I don't know if they still do that.
Yeah, they still do that.
Well, that's good.
Which has always shocked me. It's like how you can get a 50% deposit next day, but they want to pay the extra 50% for 30 days or more.
You're trying to go, I supplied the invoice to you about a month ago. Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Can we just consider this, you're upfront, your 50% payment? Let's try it again, because you can write that check in a day. I never understood that.
No, that was, and part of it was with the invention of SWIFT or ACH deposit, what is it? ACH, clearinghouse, where you had a direct deposit put into your bank account. What's called an ACH deposit. And when I was asked to do by several clients, there's so many department stores I ended up working for, and they had asked me to reduce the rate if they did the direct deposit, which would be the day I fired in an email, which came much later. As you know, you sent the invoices now by email. Back then it was by mail. Yeah. And the next day they would deposit that after clearing the invoice and checking it off. Everything was done. They would make the deposit the next day. I never agreed to that though.
Yeah, I was gonna say
That
didn't sound like something you would agree to. But if you did, I was wondering.
I said it sounds good.
Yeah.
And then I remember saying, I can wait for the check.
How much of a discount do they want?
Oh, it was the thing was like at 5% or 7% off the overall total. It was something like that. But you could ask, and they did.
So if it's a 40,000, they want like a $2,000 discount.
Well, they're like 50. Yeah, it wasn't much, but it was enough. You know, because you remember how many other jobs I had, and it did add up for savings for them. I wanted, but that was my answer to him. I said, no, I think I can wait for the check then.
Yeah.
And then that they still stayed with the direct deposit, but that was an honest answer. Yeah. But that came later after we got up and running, because in that first job I just mentioned started in September, right after Labor Day. Keep in mind, I opened up August 11th. And then the industry got quiet right there at Labor Day because that was just part of the calendar. That's how it worked. In the summer, everybody took off. And then after Labor Day, we picked up that fall season. And then it was no turning back then. It just started because I was on the phone. And see, that's something that you and I have discussed a lot. You can't get people on the phone.
Yeah, not anymore.
Back then, you could, if they weren't
even
there,
when they're in the office, they wouldn't pick up. They don't pick up the damn phone.
They would either pick up the phone or you'd get the call back, because that's when you got busy. When they checked their messages in the afternoon, you could always tell, okay, it's the phones just started ringing. I'm calling you back about you left me a message earlier today. There was always that. And that's what I enjoyed. But as later on, as you find out now, it's not the case.
Yeah, because even before COVID, I would call and 1 out of 20 maybe would answer the phone. Everything.
And then you found yourself leaving messages like I did, like, who do you have to speak with over there to get somebody to call me back? Of course, that didn't turn out well either.
I bet not.
You know, because they still wouldn't call you back. So I guess there's nobody there that could.
I was always in shock when they did answer the phone, because I had this thing set up to say to the answering machine or to their voicemail, and then if they did pick up the phone, I'd be
now what do I say?
Shit.
What? And then you stumble over your words. I already had it rehearsed to leave a message.
Yeah, you weren't supposed to answer the phone.
And now I'm going to ask you for work.
Yeah.
Now how am I going to do that?
Yeah.
I'm going to rehearse that. But a lot of going back to that, picking up on the story, just about how we kept going in that fall of that year, I stayed on that phone. I made appointments. You could do that. And that was part of the excitement about that industry. I mean, getting your photographer's portfolio together, making appointments, going all up and down the avenues of New York to client after client after client. And cell phones just started then. They were big clunky things and all that. And the charge didn't last long.
Yeah.
It was like after a few phone calls, you were dead. Everybody's trying to find a place to plug into in the lobbies of these buildings where advertising agencies were and all that. It was always fun. You could always tell when your phone's dead because they're all looking for a plug.
Yeah.
But it was well received. And then from that point on, that fall, we did a lot of clients. I had so much work coming in, and he did become a wonderful photographer. I say did because he passed away in 2016, which was sad and sudden, but his career that I represented him from 2003 to 2016 did very well.
Yeah.
And he ended up moving to France. At one point, we actually opened a small office in Paris, and I was going back and forth from Paris to New York because Spicer ended up going somewhat global in the sense. You know, we had clients in Australia, clients in South Africa, clients in the Pacific Rim there, Thailand, South America.
How did all that come in? Were you reaching out to people, or is that a word of mouth thing?
It came about because the way you worked with him and promoted him was through international editorial.
Oh, okay.
South, let's say Brazilian Harper's Bazaar. There were other magazines that were French or Italian or South American, Australian, Japanese, and we could work them out of New York because the editors at large then, or the sitting editor, was what they were called. They were in New York, and they were basically the fashion stylists.
So when you did that, would Spicer come up with an idea, or you guys come up with an idea, and you go and shoot it, and then you
submit it
to these different magazines?
No, we'll give it to. Well, at that time, it was important to know the sittings editor or the fashion stylist. That's the same name, but they became the magazine recognized them as sitting editors. And we were very connected with them. And I knew that that was important to have in your pocket, was that because they could open doors, and they did. And so keep in mind, this is at the brink of at the very opening of the door of digital photography. Everything was done by film. So you had to use labs a lot and wait for, the test this and that, and then get the film back, and then you had to ship it after they made their selects.
Yeah.
And so that was done with the sittings editor and so forth. And a lot of things back then, there was some emailing and stuff, but not to the technology and advancement that today is. But it worked, and it was time, but it also, there was a lot of work. And as he grew more and more, as his work grew, working with these international magazines more and more, along came the celebrities of these countries that were being groomed by PR agencies and so forth, brought to America. So we started working in photography with the celebrities. And he did a lot of musicians. And that came about with Mary J. Blige giving him his first opportunity.
How was that shit?
That was developed because a makeup artist that Mary J. Blige used liked working with Rod Spicer at another job. He suggested that she have her people look at his work. And that was all brought in. And then the editor of Essence magazine, editor-in-chief, I should say, was the one that called us in for a meeting, and she wanted him to do the cover of Mary J. Blige on the cover.
What was the shoot with her like?
That was amazing. That was altogether different because, it was the first time I worked with an ethnic magazine, Essence, and also opened the door to many Black celebrities for us and talent, which was a wonderful world. It was a lot of, I enjoyed it because there was a lot of musicians involved there. And that just kept opening up. And she became a very devoted client and friend. Actually, a little side note here is that when she retired, she asked Spicer to do a photograph of her. And we did it for gratis. This is a gift for you to get, not to be done. She still included a check, which I won't tell you the amount. It was a quite sizable check, and she paid it anyway. And to say, this is why I say thank you for all these years.
Oh, wow.
So that ran.
Did she do the Super Bowl this year?
Did who?
And Mary J. Blige in the Super Bowl this
I
year?
think that I saw that she's going to be halftime, right?
Yeah, like with.
But her career just
Dre
kept going and going. We photographed her, and Spicer went on tour with her for one of her tours. The photographer, that was part of getting in the door with her. So he went on tour. So in between flying for wherever she was and photographing her, and then flying back to do his jobs in New York, it was busy.
Not bad.
And then that led to other work. And then the PR company brought in more actors and celebrities of that nature, saying that this work turned out so well that you did with Mary, let's try this actor. And then the next thing, Ocean Drive magazine brought up a big thing with him. And they made him, that was done by the creative director, their key photographer at that point. And he did all the celebrities for them. And that opened many, many more doors. And that was just 1 year after another. And I kept seeing you during that time in New York, but I stayed extremely busy. I had, I think at one point, 3 photographers.
So at what point did you, I know you added, so what point did you add? Because you were, every time I came to see you, we never got together until like 7 o'clock or later. Because and even then I'd walk in the door and you were on the phone.
And that's what it took, because back then, we did it. We worked, here it is, let's say 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, it's New York, but yet you're on the phone because Europe is open. And you did everything by phone. You didn't want to know the phone bills back then. but everybody would talk, and you could get them to call you back. And that was part of the work, was talking on the phone. But then when the clock brought into New York, you're working New York, it's 9 to 5, that sort of thing. But then it moved to Chicago, Dallas, and there were clients there. And so now you're going into 6, 7 o'clock, is only an hour different. But then it came to the West Coast. And that was 3 hours behind it. So I'd stay at the desk and some night till 9 or 10 at night, just because it was the West Coast. I don't think that exists anymore. I don't think that happens.
I do remember I stopped by one time. It was probably around 2 o'clock, and Rod was there, Spicer was there, and I walked into your office when you guys. This is when you had like your apartment was down the hall, but your office was here.
Right.
And Rod was in the office doing something. And I stopped at the office and I was like, "Where's Tony?" He's like, "He's taking a nap, man. He's been up since like 4 a.m. or something." And he's like, "He's just taking a nap. It's probably gonna be like an hour or two, and he'll be back over here." And I was like, "Wow, that's the first time I ever heard of you taking a nap." But then it's when it really kicked in about how much you worked and how early you got up and how late you stayed up. And because, like I said, every time I ever saw you, you were constantly on the phone.
And I didn't have an assistant per se when I did the agency. But that was there was a time there. Let's say we were working with a client in France, for instance, and that may have been one of those times. But I would get up at 3 a.m. because it was 9 o'clock their time. And maybe by 10, there would be the first phone call. They weren't exactly right at 9 their time, but 10 o'clock their time, it was 4 o'clock in New York. And then I'd start. And then by about 3 or 4 in the afternoon or 2, like you say, sometimes I just got to close my eyes for a while. Because then I knew I had to get back up and work until 9 o'clock again. And then still get up 4 o'clock the next morning and do it again. Yeah. And did that a lot.
What made you bring on more photographers?
They asked pretty much. I didn't go after them in the sense I would, "Oh, please come, let me represent you." They came because one of the photographers I represent knew me anyway from the industry, and she did very well. And she was the one that came to see me and said, "Can you do for me what you do for Spicer?" And I knew her work, and I didn't see why I couldn't. And it worked out. But she wasn't as committed as Spicer was, as we worked together as business partners too. She was somebody.
She was also a different style.
She was a different style altogether, more lifestyle, more location, as he was more studio. And she also lived in Brazil for half the year. So you still got to deal with agencies that were representing her on that capacity there. And so she worked with me and I represented her for a few years, and then she ended up moving back. And then that's when I sort of got forgotten. There's still less and less time that wasn't devoted. Like, "Are you available these times?" "Well, I'm booked," or "I'm busy doing this." And then after a while, it's like, okay, I focus more on the work that who wants to do the work. And then there was another photographer that was someone that was an assistant photographer. And he had beautiful work, and his photographer that he worked for said, "You should look at this man's work." And he did work, and he did beautiful work. But then the same thing started happening with him as far as living in London and then in LA and visiting shortly in New York. So between his personal life, his travel life, his living, it worked for a while. But then I didn't want to kill myself at it anymore, because not only was I up doing one photographer at 4 a.m, I had another one calling me at 6 a.m. from London, like, okay. And then while you're in LA, it's 10 o'clock at night, you're calling me because it's only 7 o'clock your time and you're just finishing an assignment. So you've kind of got spread. I did that for about 3 or 4 years though. And then I went back to what I do.
And you were producing too, right?
Yeah, that's when I took the toll on me. And that's when I let go and suggested to the other photographers, I need to focus more on this. And you guys have made steps to move away from New York and be less available and all that. I went deeper into production. And that was a whole other world too. That was fun. A lot of fun. And it was very lucrative.
I remember having dinner with you one night. You were like, "I made this much money this year. You want to keep talking about me, or you want to keep talking about me?"
I remember that comment because I at one point I thought it was almost like Monopoly. I was like, "Where is all this money coming from?" It just started happening. I was very thankful, mind. I wasn't smug about it, but I was just like, from one year to the next, it was a difference of like a lot. And it afforded me a lot more things, and it was a wonderful time. And I ran like that, and that stayed with me up until about 2012. And then the industry sort of started collapsing, and everybody's pretty much aware. The invention of the cell phone and everything went digital, and magazines started shutting down, less and less opportunity to expose your work as far as being published, and it all kind of wrapped up and stopped.
And then a photographer now.
And that's it, huh?
And everybody thinks they're a photographer now.
Well, that's what they do with these cell phones. But that's what it is. The phone does a lot of work for you.
My daughter works for little boutique, and I've seen it with other ones. They don't even use photographers. They basically just take their iPhone out there and they just shoot the clothes and then they slap it up on Instagram.
Oh, I remember teasing this one young photographer. He was in New York, even nameless, but he was using the cell phone to do his work on, and then one of those little throwaway cameras.
Oh yeah.
And I remember teasing him, saying that, does that have an f-stop on it? He goes, I'm sure it's here somewhere. And I just thought, oh, okay, you get busy with that. But they didn't know cameras and any of that type of art and photography. It was all done by the device.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, how it ended is, like I said earlier in the conversation, Spicer passed away. And I figured I have to do something else at this point. It wasn't ever going to be, again, like it was. And like I had mentioned, the industry changed considerably. You know that too as well. And then it became not any fun.
Yeah.
It happened to me too. Call day in and day out. Please return my call. You could say, hi, I'm dying. I'm on fire here. Can you send over the fire truck? Or no, not even a squirt hose or anything. But I would look and say, this is not for me anymore because it isn't working like it used to. It's not the ball that rolled.
Right.
And it stopped. And now I somehow ended up working in film production on movies, with starting off with a catering chef and going over there working with her to fulfill the U.S. actors' needs and their likes, and providing a service as a concierge of such, to connect them with where they were located, let's say in Prague or Budapest or Bucharest, wherever the location was, and trying to fit that together. And it had a purpose, and it had, when you came to visit, you saw how nicely it was put together.
Yeah.
And it was fun for me. It was different, but it was active, and it was, once again, busy. And here we are today, and I'm wondering now what to do with it.
Well, you just produced a movie. You're executive producer.
That was my first time doing that. That was in Albania, and it's going on right now, as they seem to be trying to finish up their getting the premiere off the ground.
Yeah.
Which I sort of bow that, because it can only be one word or one voice that makes decisions. You can't have, well, I'm going to go in this direction with this, and I'm going to try this direction. Meanwhile, I think this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I said, when you guys come up with a plan on your premiere and where you want to start, let me know. And that's where we are today. And it's a beautiful movie. It's a short film. As you know, you saw it. And I think it has a lot of potential for being picked up by a major distributor or a network to become a series or become a feature, a full feature film. And I think that's left to be seen when it gets its premiere and gets exposed as far as broadcast and seen by those that matter and by the public. And so that's where I am today, here in Charlotte with you, wondering what kind of pot to stir up next.
So what would you say was your favorite shoot that you worked on?
One of my favorite shoots. Well, there are several, so it's difficult.
You can give me one.
I'm going to give you one that was a lot of fun. There was a shoot. We worked for a department store. I guess I could say that it was called Kohl's, or it is called Kohl's. And we were one of the major lead photography teams that they had. They had several art directors, and they had one creative director that was delegating all this photography and all this work to Spicer. At one point, it was 2010 or 2008, sorry, when he had charge of the entire Christmas in-store, out of home.
Oh, wow.
He did everything. And it was a shoot that lasted 45 days. And that was shot in July for that Christmas. And that was one of the most exciting, because it took me about 15 days to prep for it, then 45 days to execute the actual production of shooting, and then another 10 days to wrap it all up, get everything returned. I mean, with the different sets, we at one point had 3 studios going at once, where he would go from one set to the next, because it depended on whether it was the children's shoot, or they had their own set design there, or the men's or the women's, or the accessories, or the home goods, or whatever was involved with it. It was so he would go from one studio to the next.
You were like building out sets,
and we build out
to
the
look
set.
like houses and that kind of thing.
They would look like someone's kitchen. They'd
Yeah.
look like someone's bedroom. Look like someone's home, or just look like a seamless, for
Yeah.
fashion and so forth, or with some sort of background designed. But it was exciting, and I had never done anything like that, and I never did a job that long again.
That's huge.
That was a long job, and I had other.
Did you have breaks? Would you do like 5 days, 2 days off,
We
or
had-
6 days and a day off?
We
or
did
something
6
like that?
days and had Sunday off.
Yeah. Okay.
We could have gone for a long, but even they too said we can't. This is not the kind of
45 days
pace.
straight
Yeah,
would be
no.
ridiculous.
So we worked Monday through Saturday, which was still
Yeah, still a lot.
9-10 hour days.
Yeah.
And they even asked, do we need to put in a break day later on? And I said, I think we're okay. The
Yeah.
quicker, because I had other options, I kept pushing ahead
Oh, yeah.
to say, now we got to sew these in a time. As you know, when you push an option, you can only go so far before you're out
Yeah,
of
you're gone.
your option's gone, and they get somebody else to do the work. And that was really one I always remember. That I was like, what day is it? At one point, was it Tuesday?
Yeah.
Was it Thursday? You just got up every morning and went to the studio. But keep in mind,
Did you ever get up on Sunday and go to the studio?
I would-
You're like,
I-
oh shit!
I would have to
I'm supposed
catch
be
up.
here.
Yeah, that was like catch up with your personal life too. Where's my laundry?
Yeah.
What day is it that I'm gonna? Because living in New York City, it was like you still had to
Yeah.
get other things done for your personal life, but also there were calls that were coming and things that had to be attended to for upcoming assignments by other clients.
Yeah.
So you had to make time on that day to say, okay. And
Were you on set every day, or
on set every day? And
so
thank
you
God
produced it?
I produced it.
Oh shit!
Produced it as well as thank God for laptops, right?
Yeah.
Because they played an important part. And I would just turn and go into an area off the studio where there's like a place you could have a private conversation or a conference room. And then I'd work from there, like for an hour or so to get other clients up the bar, and then go back out and finish up with what the production was that I was involved in right there. It was fun. It was exciting. And I always wanted more to do after that.
Okay.
And that was the kind of momentum that in 5 years we built up. It was every
That's
day.
amazing.
It was not one day. I remember there was one point he said, do you think I could take a vacation? Like he wanted to go visit family and so forth.
Yeah.
But there was always time for that because there were enough holiday breaks, but he wanted a vacation.
A real one.
You need to go on
Yeah.
vacation in the summer. Maybe not now. Or maybe later. That was always one of my let me show you the options we have right now. And he was a businessman. He go, we got that many. Yeah. And what I didn't do was stop taking options. I just kept pushing it and said,
Right.
this one came in and this one came in. Before you know it, he took his vacation at Thanksgiving or Christmas. You had to, right?
Oh, God.
And there was enough downtime
Yeah.
in our own, for holidays and so forth, that not just take the holiday off, but a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So it worked.
Well, that's good.
It did good. It did well. And that was one of my most biggest jobs that I remember, and fun. And then we did a shoot for Dooney and Burke, which was a ladies' handbag company and accessories.
Yeah.
And that was a lot because I worked directly with the owner of the company, Phyllis Dooney, and her father.
Oh wow.
And Burke was the attorney.
Really?
Yeah, her father, Phyllis's father, Mr. Dooney, I call him, but she was the creative director at the company. And Burke was his attorney. So they put together this concept of somehow they were imports of ladies' accessories, and however they were involved with it. They said we can make our own, we can do our own line. And so anyway, Dooney and Burke was born. And that was where the name came from. It was his name and his attorney's name. And that there was I'm sure they still have those bags out there in stores or for sale online. But we started off with them doing their campaigns with major models or celebrities. We had Lindsay Lohan at one point.
How was that?
That wasn't good. She was a no-show.
I saw something with her and it's like, what is it, Merton? It was a team. I can never remember their names.
Mert Alice?
No, it was I think, I don't know if they're husband, wife, or boyfriend and girlfriend at the time that split up. It was like Mert and something. Anyway, they had a reality show for a minute. and one of their clients was Lindsay Lohan. And she was supposed to be there at, I don't know, say 10 a.m. And they kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, like 9 p.m., she showed 8 or 9 p.m. And all I'm sitting there watching the show so they can, at what point do you just say, I'm done, I'm going home? Then you just keep waiting for this woman to show up.
Oops, sorry about that.
Yeah. So
Well, that was the day we
did
had.
she show it all, or did she just not?
No, what happened is that we got on the phone with her agent and her PR, her public relations agent, and everyone has an excuse or as to what's happening. It's always going to be.
Was it the same excuse?
Or,
they all have different
give her an
excuses?
hour more, or she's delayed, or there she's. It's always something that it didn't matter because now you're cutting into production time.
Right.
Because meanwhile, you've got people you're paying photography, or the client's paying, I should say.
Yeah.
The producer, the stylist, the hair and makeup, the catering, you keep going and going. There was a crew of probably 20 to 25 people there. And then at one point, I remember turning to the client, Phyllis Dooney. I remember turning to her and saying, I think we better make another choice here, or let's just scrap a half day. Which I called it and said, we're just going to kill it in half day, but I'll rebook it. So I was able to get around other fees that happened because of what happened with the talent. And then come to find out she had never got on a plane from LA to go to New York and all that. This came later. And then they tried to rebook it. And that's when I said, I don't think I want to be a part of this. I strongly urge you find another talent.
Yeah.
And so we did. Found another talent.
And
we ended up going with, at that time, President Bush's daughter.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
She was
I just remember something Bush.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember her first name. Lauren.
Yeah.
Lauren Bush. And I ended up going with her, and she endorsed it. And she was breaking into being a model.
Right. Yeah.
And so that we did that with her, and that was fun. That's the first time I worked with Secret Service.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I didn't either until I started saying, what are all these black SUVs doing here?
Yeah.
And it was all Secret Service. We had to go to location. And we shot over at the Navy Yard in Brooklyn as a location. It was an old abandoned Navy Yard. Abandoned. It's not used for the Navy anymore. And there's a lot of rental or shot. It's a location for filming and etc. Anyway, we went over there, and it was so funny because the manager of the yard said, how many cars are in your production crew? I said, well, there's just 3, but then there's probably 5 of the Secret Service guys. So that kind of like became a first of all, we're all piled out there just lining up black SUV after SUV and shooting in the Navy Yard. But that ended up being a very nice shoot. That was the same client, I'm telling you, that they were a lot of fun to work with. And they were free spirits too, because if they said, oh, I think we need this as well to add to this for the next day, because a lot of days it was multiple days. Instead of 1 day shoot, sometimes 3 days or sometimes 4 days. And not every day did you use the endorsement, the talent, or you could use sometimes what they call staff models, where you cut them off till there's nothing recognized, and did the wardrobes or the accessories on them with the scarf, and then you saw them holding the handbag, for point of sale imaging and things of that nature, and media for sales. But they always would go with you if you didn't have to fight on the budget.
Well,
that's a long time to take to say that. You'd say, I need this much more. Okay, fine, let's do that. But it ended up being a good shoot, and we worked for them for about 5 years. And throughout like 3 or 4 times a year. So when you take in all the other clients that he constantly repeated every year, you keep adding more and more and more. So therefore you got your days, your Monday through Fridays are all sewed up. And that was my story about being a photographer.
Talk about Lindsay Lohan that show. Was there ever a point, or is there ever a point where, like with me, after 10 hours, my assistants give time and a half? Mm-hmm. Is there ever a point where the photographer fee does overtime?
There is a point, but we never charged it.
Okay.
Only because what happened at that point is that I was the producer to many of these clients. Yeah. And so we were given a budget. And if we had to go over that budget, a lot of times it reflected back on how we were producing.
Yeah.
So rather than push it, we ate it. But it didn't happen that often. It wasn't something that, okay, another week it's happening. No, it's very rare. A lot of it sometimes was either weather related or travel related. That delayed, but not usually was it much more than that. But when it did go over like 12 hours, I did have to pay my assistants. But that came out of my budget.
Yeah. So I usually tell the clients when we're coming up, like, hey, listen, we're coming up on 10 hours. As soon as we cross over that, then I have to start paying the assistants more. Usually they'll go, oh, okay, and they'll either hurry it up, or either just like, oh, we're done, we're good. We
wrap it.
Now all the rest of that stuff is just fluff anyway.
Instead of 65 shots, we're going to just do the 50.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. But I've had clients like that before I was producing. That, like you say, that was how it worked. But as I got later on with the production, there was too much flexibility in my budget that I could say we could forgive rather than go knock on the door. But it's true, it does happen, and it is warranted. Yeah. You should get paid overtime.
So this is the last question. So what is the strangest, most interesting, weirdest thing that's ever happened to you since you started into this?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one to answer. What's the strangest?
I mean, it can be anything from requests you've had to do things to a shoot you had with somebody to, I had one where they were in South America and they had extra gas cans on top of the cars because they were going to be out in the middle of nowhere. Somebody in the middle of the night stole all the gas and filled it up with like nothing.
You had that?
No. This was somebody was telling me. Okay. So they stole all the gas and just put the cans back on the car. So when they got out there, they ended up running out of gas and had no idea that their gas had been stolen.
Oh no, that's all I see.
So it can be anything. It can be anything from somebody going, hey, I want you to do this because of this job, or
There were a few things that I guess because I didn't go right and answer pinpoint something because there were some strange things that occurred, yes, but I just kind of thought that was just part of the industry. That just comes with the territory. One of the most difficult things, or things I didn't want to relive, was that we were shooting in Miami, and we were on location shooting in Miami down in Isla Mirada, which was about
everybody shoots there.
Everybody got there at one point back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. It was all there, and that was about 2.5 hours from the airport, and there were so many delays for these summer thunderstorms that you got down south, we got down here, that there was a lot of delays going into Miami that day. So anyway, long story there, and what really was like a nightmare of awful was that I was supposed to wrap the day by having everybody there in Miami and then going down to Isla Mirada for the location and going back and forth to the airport with car services, bringing daily talent and those that were booked for one day and then they got out, those that are booked for 2 days. Okay, now they're housed there. Well, this one's coming in at the airport. We got to arrange for this car service to pick her up. All of that was coming about, but then you added in all the delays. So let's say the last flight was scheduled to come in about 8 p.m. at night. You were still there at the airport at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, hoping that flight was coming in because that girl was booked the next morning. And you didn't have much choice to vacate. You couldn't find somebody. Agencies are closed. Who do you call now? So you prayed and prayed and prayed. And then you had to get in the car and drive 2.5 hours more down to Isla Mirada to get her there for 5:30, 6 o'clock for hair and makeup to start shooting at daybreak. And then you get to take her back to the airport and wait for the next flight that didn't come in that day either because of the same situation, weather or delays. And stayed there at the airport 8, 9, 10, 11 at night. Oh, finally came in. Now drive that person. And I didn't necessarily have to be a part of it, but I didn't trust it. Meaning that I want to be there too, because I want to be the one that has to say, okay, I've got to call the client, or I've got to say this is a weather hold, or whatever way you wanted to move forward with it. Because if you didn't have the model, it wasn't anything you were going to photograph without it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the, I didn't want to do that again. And it happened several days while I was down there. It just seemed to be one of those bad luck things that the weather pattern brought in with it. And every day it was delays, every day. I think we were there for 5 days. Back and forth. All I know is that I tore up that overseas highway.
I bet you did.
Every day. And that was fun. I think I may have told you that story once. I don't know, but
No, I never heard that one.
we were down there shooting for Ralph Lauren, doing a shoot for Ralph Lauren, and it was swimwear and resort wear. That was the resort. Yeah, did that. We did them down at Isla Morada. Stayed at that beautiful place. I think everybody stayed at the Moorings,
Yeah, I think
which was one of the prettiest resorts I've ever seen in a long time. Owned by a Frenchman, a man from France. Kept it very nice. It was the decorum was all all Hermes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, everywhere, fabrics.
I don't remember a lot about it. I remember my producer got drunk at dinner.
That happened a lot there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did exactly what I told her not to do. It's like, do not, because I could tell she was flirting with the creative director, art director. I was like, do not go back to his room tonight.
Yeah, well,
Do not do that. Next morning, I wake up, we're all meeting, we're all getting in the vans because I think we'd finished the shoot that day and we we're going home. And she was like, oh, wait, I think I left my flip flops in the art director's. I was like, son of a bitch. It's like, I told you, the one thing I told you not to do. So all I needed was for her to piss him off and not go well. But then again, he was pissing off my assistants the entire time because he was right beside me with his camera. And wherever I was, he was literally over my shoulder shooting. At one point, I'm sitting on a boat and I'm like sitting on the ground shooting. And I had to tell him to move his foot because it was in my shot.
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I used a line different than that because now that you mentioned that topic, that came up a few times. But my response to my crew and to all the talent that I worked with, and as the producer, I used this line that I once saw on a movie with Cher and Olympia Dukakis called Moonstruck. And Olympia Dukakis was playing her mother, and she was telling John Mahoney, who was another actor in the film, who was having some sort of problems with his girlfriend that he was dating from school, who he was the teacher and she was the student. And she said, I got an old saying that my mom told me. You want to hear it? And he goes, what is it? She goes, don't shit where you eat.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That was like, whatever you guys do, have fun and all that, but just don't shit where you eat here because it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And it always was, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you get to work for that client again?
I did, but I didn't work with him again. And
how about that producer?
I worked with the producer again, but I had to keep her under control. I was like, you cannot get drunk anymore.
Okay, keep the chastity belt on.
Yeah. Pretty much. Thank you for doing it.
All right.
2 years for me to get you.